If you take your credit card and you go shopping and you run up a large credit card debt, you're running a trade deficit with all those shops. Now, it would be pretty strange if you then blamed all the shop owners for having sold you all those things. You're ripping me off. You're ripping me off. You're ripping me off. I'm running a trade deficit.
I guess my question to you is, Betsy, is there any indication that you've heard from either the president or from his advisors as to what exactly needs to be fixed?
Whoa, there's a lot there. No, I don't think that there is a clear plan. He seems to have a view that anytime we're buying something from somebody else, we're giving up money, which is bad. And so we just shouldn't buy things. That seems to be his logic. There is some underlying sense that America needs to rebuild manufacturing. We can definitely dig into that and talk about that, but across the board tariffs, not about the rebuilding manufacturing.
Okay, guys, we're going to be listening to some professors today explain to us about the tariffs that Donald Trump called himself putting in place. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, and we're going to be educated today. You're going to enjoy this one. Let's get with it.
If you take your credit card and you go shopping and you run up a large credit card debt, you're running a trade deficit with all those shops. Now, it would be pretty strange if you then blamed all the shop owners for having sold you all those things. You're ripping me off. You're ripping me off. You're ripping me off. I'm running a trade deficit. That is the level of understanding of the President of the United States. The trade deficit does not represent at all trade policies. It represents spending relative to production or earnings. We call that an identity. I teach it in the second day of my course in international monetary economics. Trump never made it to the second day. So he says, you're running a trade deficit. Look, they're all cheating me. But all that's happening is the United States is outspending its national income. And you can look at the national income chart. You can add up consumption and investment and government spending, and you can subtract off gross national product, and lo and behold, what will that equal? Not approximately, exactly. That will equal the current account deficit, which is the comprehensive measure of how much you spend on goods and services versus how much you sell in goods and services. So the United States runs a current account deficit because it spends more than it produces. Why does it do that? We have a big credit card in the United States. It's called the national government. The U.S. government spends about $2 trillion a year more than it takes in revenues. What it's doing is making transfers to the American people and to American businesses. It doesn't tax Americans for those transfers because, here's another little fact, because the congressmen that vote on the budget got into office by being paid for their campaigns by rich people who don't like taxes. So the political system says spend, but don't tax us. So we run a chronic deficit in the United States. That spending goes out either as transfer payments or goods and services, and that's more than our national income, which is about $30 trillion, and our spending is about $31 trillion. And that's our trade deficit. And for that, Donald Trump blames the world. Okay, I fail him for this if he were my student. He's my president. It's a little weirder because when he did this, In 2 days, the world lost $10 trillion of market capitalization. By the way, where did it go? Did it get transferred from here to here? No, it got destroyed. Why destroyed? Because trade, something also the President of the United States doesn't understand, is mutually beneficial. So if you stop trade, everybody loses. It's not that one side wins, the other side loses. He cannot understand that concept as a guy that traded real estate in New York. So his idea is somebody had to win, somebody had to lose. But what happened when he made this announcement was $10 trillion was wiped out worldwide. It's not that the U.S. went up and they went down. No, everybody went down because the whole world system is based on a division of labor, and he's breaking that division of labor into pieces. So then people said, this doesn't make sense. Even the very rich people that gave him the money for him to get into office started saying this doesn't make sense. The hedge fund managers who were his big campaign contributors, Elon Musk, who paid for his election, became prime minister. He said this doesn't make sense. And then the markets said this doesn't make sense. Not only $10 trillion, but as the finance minister said, interest rates started to rise because people began to dump U.S. Treasury debt.
The safest thing in the world, apparently.
So interesting what happened. It's not quite true that he reversed things. First, he left on this 10% tariff, except for one country, for China,
145%
where he
on some
raised
products.
the tariff rates. That's because the United States has a deep, neurotic attachment to China. The U.S. political system hates China. Why? Because China's big and successful. And so that the U.S. hates. It's a rival, it's a competitor. And so this is the one thing he left on. Now he's going to mess up everything with this too, because in a trade war between the U.S. and China, China wins. China does not depend on the U.S. market very much. It's about 12% of China's exports. China will do just fine. It's just dumb policy. There's no more, sorry to say it, there's just no more explanation to this than that. It makes no sense. Now, it raises, if I could, just one last point. How can this happen when it makes no sense? And that people should understand, we are in one-person rule in the United States. Our political system is in a state of collapse. What President Trump did is an emergency decree. Everything he does is an emergency decree. Literally, you can go on to whitehouse.gov and then follow the menu to executive decrees. And there are dozens of them. And each one starts the same way. With the powers invested in me as President of the United States, I hereby declare A, nonsense, B, nonsense, C, nonsense. Because he's king. Those powers are not invested in the President of the United States. They're invested in the Congress. You read Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. It says that all duties originate with the Congress. And specifically in the lower house, all legislation has to start in the House of Representatives. But the U.S., starting in 1945 after World War II, became a military state to a large extent. And so it sprinkled in its legislation emergency, emergency, emergency. And Trump doesn't have to prove anything's an emergency, he just has to say something's an emergency. So suddenly the trade deficit became an emergency, and on that basis, he issues a one-person rule. Even his aides don't know what he's doing. You raise one final interesting issue, which is that the market recovered about $4 trillion when he reversed. Anyone who knew that 5 minutes before made billions. This is not the cleanest government in the world, I can tell you. I'd be hugely surprised if some people didn't know just a bit ahead of time, starting with members of the U.S. Congress, by the way.
We all lost something when the stock market crashed, and it's still crashing. Check your 401k or your IRA. This professor is one of the types of people that Donald Trump had an opportunity to be educated by when he was a young person. But he was one of the type of people that rather go the other route and become a real estate developer and at the same time a bully. I think Donald Trump always had mafia aspirations because he acts like he always wanted to be one of them. He was responsible for tearing down a whole lot of different stuff, the USFL football league. He bankrupted casinos and Trump Airlines, Trump State, Trump Water. All of his companies failed. But guess what? The American people, for some strange reason, voted this guy back in, and we followed him right back into the White House, giving him a second chance at draining our treasury. Donald Trump just wanted a few things out of this election. He wanted to stay out of prison. He wanted to keep his hands on those top secret documents that he stole when he left the White House last time. And he wanted to get back in so he can get his money on the his hands on the taxpayer dollars, which he is doing now. That was market manipulation, and we all know it, that Donald Trump did not long ago by crashing the stock market and then telling everybody now is a good time to buy. So it's not about us. It never has been about us, but we've been swindled by the con man. Don't feel bad because he's been doing it all his life and somehow getting away with it. Let's continue.
So what does this mean for average workers and consumers? Betsy Stevenson is a former economic advisor to President Obama and a professor of economics at the University of Michigan. Justin Wolfers is also a professor of economics at the University of Michigan, and they both join me now live. It's good to have two life partners on the show here talking about the same subject. Betsy Johnson and Justin, welcome to the program. Okay, so Betsy, let's start with you because we see the markets once again in turmoil around the world, blinking red lights about recession fears, if not worse, in the months and weeks to come if these tariffs are actually implemented, which these reciprocal tariffs are set to go into effect just 2 days from now. But the president seems unfazed. He played golf over the weekend, is telling Republicans, it appears, over Twitter not to panic at this point. And he says sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. I guess my question to you is, Betsy, is there any indication that you've heard from either the president or from his advisors as to what exactly needs to be fixed?
Whoa, there's a lot there. No, I don't think that there is a clear plan. He seems to have a view that anytime we're buying something from somebody else, we're giving up money, which is bad. And so we just shouldn't buy things. That seems to be his logic. There is some underlying sense that America needs to rebuild manufacturing. We can definitely dig into that and talk about that, but across the board tariffs, not about the rebuilding manufacturing. We put a tariff on vanilla from Madagascar. We're not going to start growing vanilla anytime in the United States. And frankly, we're not even really going to start making Nikes again in the U.S. or doing a lot of our garment production in the United States. What is really going to happen is we're going to pay more for stuff. Because we're going to pay more for stuff, we're going to buy less stuff. And that's why markets are melting down. They're seeing the net present value of sales through the next many, many years, not just the next few months, not just a small disruption, but coming down due to these policies.
And Justin, given these policies, if they are in fact implemented, you have a piece out over the weekend that says your life will never be the same after these tariffs. And you note that tariffs are costly not just because they raise prices, but because they force you to make different decisions in terms of extracting a different kind of cost from you as well. Can you walk us through a real life example?
Yeah, so for your viewers, next time you're at the grocery store, what I want you to do is as you go down the aisle, just pick up a few items. And normally you'd look at the price tag, but this time I want you to take a look at where it was made. You'll discover a whole heck of a lot of your family budget is spent on stuff that comes from abroad. And even the stuff that's made in America turns out to be made in America often based on raw materials from abroad. So start factoring in a 20% price hike on all of that stuff. And then it gets harder than that again, which is there are things like, say, there's going to be higher washing machine prices. One way to avoid paying those higher prices is you keep the old washing machine around. Well, in this case, you don't pay the tariff in money. You pay it instead on rust stains on your old shirts. You pay it when the machine becomes unbalanced, the big thuds in the middle of the day. So there are all sorts of ways in which these tariffs are going to affect every corner of our lives.
Okay, there you have it, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments. We can have a back and forth discussion on this, but all I want to say is keep an eye on your 401k, and you got to stay on top of things. And these tariffs are all about Donald Trump's ego, as everything is. When you're a narcissist, you make everything about yourself. He's all about Donald Trump. He can care less about us. Look at what's happening to the farmers. Most of those people voted for Donald Trump. He lost that first tariff war with China and had to pay those farmers $30 billion in save face money. So he can care less. But we're going to leave this one right here, guys, and I will be digging up some more news to bring to you, and we'll be having our discussions. Okay, I'll see you guys on the next one.
I ask you guys to like and subscribe and share with your